I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Most people measure their lifespan in years, but what if we could measure our health span instead? How do you do that? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Our guest today is one of the country's leading proponents of functional medicine. He advocates for lifestyle choices that can lengthen and strengthen your life.
My uncle once told me it's not how long we live, but how we live that counts. Is it possible to have both a long and healthy life?
What changes will reduce your risks for chronic diseases or even help reverse them?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn the secrets for living your longest, healthiest life.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, are doctors overusing computed tomography imaging? CT or CAT scans are performed on more than 60 million patients annually. That number has increased by over 30% since 2007. Such images can be extremely helpful in making a diagnosis, but there are risks that many patients may not realize. The name CAT scan sounds innocuous, but in fact, it represents ionizing radiation similar to X-rays. An investigation published in JAMA Internal Medicine projected the number of future cancers due to this radiation exposure. The researchers used data from the University of California, San Francisco International CT Dose Registry and modeled the effects of the radiation. They estimated that approximately 103,000 cancers are likely to result from the 93 million scans conducted in 2023 on 60 million people. The risks are highest in children and adolescents, but many more adults undergo CT scans. The scientists conclude that if current practices persist, CT-associated cancer could eventually account for 5% of all new cancer diagnoses annually. The lead author of the research told the San Francisco Chronicle, "The goal is not to scare patients, but to help them understand going forward they need to think about every time a CT is suggested. Do they need it? Do they understand why it's done? And work with their physician. Of course, during an emergency, a CT scan can be crucial, but they should be used judiciously."
Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRIs, do not use ionizing radiation. They can be an effective way to detect problems, especially in soft tissue. Doctors may use them to diagnose a stroke or a joint problem. However, MRIs are not free from risk. Frequently, radiologists use gadolinium as a contrast agent to make the image clearer. This rare earth metal can sometimes linger in the body and may cause systemic fibrosis, a serious complication. Researchers at the University of New Mexico have found that diet can help contribute to the problem. People who have been consuming foods rich in oxalates, such as spinach, rhubarb, nuts, or chocolate, seem to be more likely to form toxic metal nanoparticles. The lead investigator also suggests avoiding vitamin C prior to an MRI because it may increase oxalate levels in the bloodstream. The authors of this research suggest that physicians use gadolinium thoughtfully to minimize serious complications.
The PREDIMED study in Spain established the benefits of a Mediterranean diet to prevent heart attacks. Now, an extension of the study has examined the effects of weight loss through exercise and a Mediterranean diet on bone health. The 924 volunteers were 55 to 75 years old and overweight at the start of the 3-year study. The researchers assigned half of them to a Mediterranean diet with no caloric restriction and no physical activity. The others were randomly assigned to an energy-restricted Mediterranean diet and increased physical activity. Women who were physically active slowed their loss of bone mineral density even though weight loss usually speeds that up. Men showed no significant differences between the groups.
For decades, psychedelic drugs such as psilocybin or LSD were off limits to researchers. The memory of the 1960s with the slogan sex, drugs, and rock and roll created a no-fly zone for scientific investigation. But over the last decade or so, there has been increasing interest in the use of such compounds to ease the anguish of PTSD, the existential crisis of a cancer diagnosis, drug dependency, or even schizophrenia. But the hallucinatory potential of such drugs continues to discourage many researchers from studying such compounds. Now investigators have modified LSD so it does not cause hallucinations. The new compound, called JRT, appears to have some therapeutic benefit. That's because it increases neuroplasticity. The hope is that JRT will have fast-acting antidepressant activity and may even help against schizophrenia. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. If someone asks you how old you are, what do you say? Most people respond with their chronological age, how many birthdays they've celebrated. Our guest today is focused on something far more important for our health, our biological age.
You don't have to develop chronic diseases as you get older. It may be possible even to reverse problems like type 2 diabetes or heart disease with changes in lifestyle.
To find out how, we turn to an old friend of the People's Pharmacy. Dr. Mark Hyman is a practicing family physician and the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and founder and chairman of the Food Fix campaign, dedicated to transforming our food and agriculture system through policy. Dr. Hyman is author of Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Mark Hyman.
Well, thanks so much for having me back. It's been a few decades we've been together.
It has been now 20 years. Oh, we're so happy to have you with us. And I guess the first question I'd like to ask Dr. Hyman is that you have basically been at the forefront of the food as medicine movement. Why? How did you get started thinking about food and nutrition as critical factors for good health?
Well, that's a great question. That takes me way, way, way back to college when I was 18 years old. And I met a guy who was a PhD student at Cornell in nutrition who was studying, of all things, we didn't call it that then, but the microbiome. He was studying ruminants and fiber and bacteria. And he was very focused on nutrition and health. In fact, he introduced me to a book that changed my life forever called Nutrition Against Disease by Roger Williams, one of the fathers of the framework of biochemical individuality, how we're all unique and different. And through that book, I really began to understand this whole concept of how food influences our health for good or for bad. And so that led me down a rabbit hole, and I studied yoga and learned about Rudolph Ballantyne's book called Diet and Nutrition. And that was a deep rabbit hole I went through. And I studied nutrition at Cornell, actually with Colin Campbell way back in the 80s, early 80s. And it's been a lifelong passion of mine. And as I kind of went to medical school, I sort of put it aside, but quickly realized that what I learned in medical school wasn't going to help most of my patients get better. It might mitigate symptoms, but it wasn't going to really solve their problems. And that most of the diseases I was seeing were food related, and that food was the medicine we should be using.
Well, you said that diet is the single biggest tool we have for transforming our health. And many of the people that we talk to here on the People's Pharmacy would absolutely agree with you. But it seems to me that a lot of people don't get that kind of attention from their personal healthcare providers. Why not?
Well, it's no fault of their own. I mean, my daughter's in medical school now, and I asked her, Rachel, how much nutrition did you get? Well, she said, we learned about amino acids and fatty acids and carbohydrates, but I said, what are you going to tell your patients to have for lunch? They basically have no nutrition training. And it's unfortunate because, as I said earlier, the single biggest killer today globally is food. And the single biggest driver of all the chronic diseases that we're seeing in the world today, in America especially, is food. And so doctors are not learning about the single most important thing that they need to know in order to treat their patients. And it's unfortunate because our whole system is set up based on a pharmaceutical approach, which has its utility, but is very limited in its ability to actually cure disease. Diabetes is not something that can be cured with drugs. It can be cured with food, but it can't be cured with drugs.
Well, you know what fascinates me, Dr. Hyman, is that there was a recent study in the Journal of the American Cancer Society, and it found that at least 40% of new cases of cancer can be attributed to preventable causes. Now, obviously, smoking being, a major one, but diet is also critical. Why hasn't that message sunk in?
It's a great question. I remember being on my oncology rotation in medical school, and I said to the oncology attending, I said, how many cancers do you think are related to nutrition and food? And I thought he would say, 10%. He said 70%. And I think it's right. But again, there are some exciting advances in this field. And Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee, who wrote The Emperor of All Maladies, describing the nature of cancer, is doing pioneering research on the use of ketogenic diets to cure stage 4 cancer, like melanoma and pancreatic cancer, that are otherwise incurable. And I think we really have neglected this whole body of data because as physicians we don't know what to do with it. The data really clearly shows that most of the common cancers today, breast, colon, prostate, pancreatic cancer, are related to what we're eating, to food, and to this primarily to insulin resistance, which is the biggest driver of most of the cancers that we see today. And insulin resistance is a direct result of our diet that's high in refined sugars and carbohydrates that is really new to human beings over the last 150 years.
Dr. Hyman, in your super new book, Young Forever, which sounds maybe a little hyperbole, you describe 7 essential systems that we really need to have functioning properly if we're going to have good health and longevity. And I'm wondering if you can summarize them for us.
Of course. Well, and this is really, one of the things as I began to dive into the research around longevity, it was really clear to me that scientists were coming upon something that was, for me, very exciting, which was uncovering these root cause mechanisms underlying all chronic disease that we have been talking about in the world of functional medicine for decades, but that really have been mostly ignored by traditional medicine. Things like inflammation, mitochondrial function, the microbiome, the role of nutrition in regulating our biology. And these things are what are referred to as the hallmarks of aging, these fundamental phenomena that occur as we age. And they map across very well to the functional medicine framework, which is these 7 core biological systems that have to be operating for you to be healthy. And they're basically is a very simple concept, which is that our body is an ecosystem. It's a network, essentially a network of networks. That health is really about creating balance in those systems. And that disease occurs when there's an imbalance because of too much of something that throws those systems off, like bad food, stress, toxins, allergens, microbes, changes in the microbiome, or too little of the things that those systems need to thrive, which would be the right food, the right number of nutrients, the balance of hormones, light, air, water, movement, exercise, sleep, restorative practices that restore the nervous system, like meditation, community, connection, love, meaning, purpose. These are all the ingredients for health. And so when you have too much of the bad stuff and none of the good stuff, these systems become dysregulated. And these systems refer to as, we in functional medicine, that map across these hallmarks of aging, for example, assimilation, which is really about the microbiome in the gut, defense and repair, which is how the immune system works and talks about inflammation, the energy system, which is how our mitochondria make energy, our detoxification systems and how those have to be working for us to get rid of all the load of internal metabolic toxins and external toxins. There's our transportation system, our circulatory and lymphatic circulation that have to be operating in our blood vessels, which is enormous, amount of blood vessels and lymphatic circulation we have that to function well. Our communication systems, essentially the hormones, neurotransmitters, cytokines, peptides, all the messenger molecules that regulate everything in our body have to be in balance. And lastly, our structural system, our biomechanical structure, our bones and muscles, all the way down to the subcellular structures of the membranes, of your cell membranes and what they're made of. So these systems are, what we've learned, are a way of describing the nature of the human ecosystem. And instead of focusing on the diseases, we focus on the root causes. And scientists have said this in the hallmarks of aging. If we were to actually address the hallmarks of aging, which essentially is addressing what we've just been talking about, that we would not only extend life by a couple of years, as for example, if we got rid of cancer and heart disease, we would, from the face of the planet, we would only extend life by 5 to 7 years, which is not that much. But if we address these hallmarks of aging, we could extend life by 30 or 40 years, which means life expectancy could be 120. And so in a sense, we've been focusing on the wrong issue, which is the downstream diseases, not the upstream causes and mechanisms, and learning how to create a healthy ecosystem.
Well, you've mentioned the term functional medicine.
Yeah.
What does it mean, and how does it differ from conventional medicine?
Well, I often jokingly say it's the opposite of dysfunctional medicine, which is what we have mostly. But joking aside, it's a really an emergent theoretical framework from an enormous body of science that we call systems medicine or network medicine that came out of systems biology. And it's the opposite of reductionism, which is what current medicine is organized around, reductionist labels for diseases rather than understanding the mechanisms and causes. And so functional medicine is an attempt to create a heuristic or a way of interpreting and looking at the human body through a different set of lenses that helps us understand things better. For example, I had a patient come to see me at Cleveland Clinic who was a business coach, around 50 years old, and she had a whole list of problems. I jokingly call myself a holistic doctor because I take care of people with a whole list of problems. She had a severe psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, and saw the top doctors at Cleveland Clinic, and was on a medication that suppressed her immune system, cost $50,000 a year. She had reflux, irritable bowel, depression. She had prediabetes. She was having migraines. She had all these problems. And she was seeing the best psychiatrist for her depression, the metabolic endocrinologist for her prediabetes, the gastroenterologist for her reflux and irritable bowel. She was seeing the rheumatologist for her psoriatic arthritis. And everybody was giving her the best drugs and the best treatment available in traditional medicine.
You're listening to Dr. Mark Hyman, founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. He's also founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. Dr. Hyman's latest books are Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life, and the Young Forever Cookbook.
After the break, we'll hear what happened with the patient Dr. Hyman just described.
You've heard of lifespan. How's that different from healthspan? And how can you determine the difference between your biological and chronological ages?
Dr. Hyman has lowered his biological age, aging in reverse. How did he do that?
What kind of science is there to support healthy longevity? You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Today, we are revealing the secrets to living your longest, healthiest life. What's the difference between lifespan and health span? And how can you give yourself the best chance at a great health span? We'll also consider the distinction between chronological and biological age.
Our guest, Dr. Mark Hyman, will tell us how he got years younger. Biologically speaking, that is. Now that is some secret.
We're talking with Dr. Mark Hyman, family physician and expert in functional medicine. He's the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center and founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. Dr. Hyman has written numerous books, including Young Forever and the Young Forever Cookbook.
Dr. Hyman, you were telling us about your patient who was seeing a long list of specialists, getting incredibly expensive medications and therapy, and I'm assuming was still not feeling really great. So,
Well, that's right. I mean, she was, and she
can you
wasn't.
tell us how you and she approached her problems?
Absolutely. I think, she was getting the best care, but she was just getting care that mitigated her symptoms. So just managed her symptoms and not very well at that. And I asked a different set of questions, not what disease do you have, but what's the why? So functional medicine is really about asking why. Why do you have this problem? What's the root cause? Not what disease do you have and what drug do I give, but how do we restore balance and optimal function, hence the word functional medicine, to the body. And so I said, what do all these problems have in common? What is depression, prediabetes, irritable bowel, reflux, migraines, psoriatic arthritis? What do they all have in common? Well, the answer is inflammation. And so then from first principles, we go, well, what causes inflammation? Well, it's diet, could be food allergens, could be microbes, toxins, infections, stress, a lot of things, right? And in her case, she had a lot of digestive symptoms. And we know the microbiome plays a huge role in autoimmune disease. Again, when you go see the rheumatologist and you have rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis, they're not doing a stool sample, but they should, because that's where the problem is. They're not looking to see whether you have a leaky gut, but they should, because that's where the problem is. And so we did that with her. We found she had a lot of sensitivities to different foods. She had severe bacterial overgrowth, severe fungal overgrowth in her gut. We gave her an antibiotic, an antifungal to clear out the bad bugs, so getting rid of the bad stuff. We gave her probiotics and vitamin D and some fish oil, and we put her on an elimination diet to eliminate the most inflammatory foods, gluten, dairy, sugar, processed foods. Put her on a whole foods anti-inflammatory diet. 6 weeks later, she came back. And I didn't tell her to do this, but she says, Dr. Hyman, I stopped all my medications. I'm like, oh, why did you do that? She said, well, I was completely better. Everything's better. I'm completely normal. And I have lost 20 pounds. I have no more prediabetes. I have no more depression, no more migraines, no more irritable bowel, no more reflux, no more psoriasis, no more arthritis. And I'm off all my medications in 6 weeks. Now, not everybody has that same result, but through the principles of functional medicine, we can usually dig down to find what's going on. And this is a fundamentally different approach to dealing with health and disease. It's really what all physicians are going to be doing in the future. It's just taking a little while for people to catch up.
Well, that's a really exciting story. And I find myself thinking, so she got rid of gluten, she got rid of dairy, she got rid of sugar. She eliminated a number of other things that could be causing her trouble. Was she able to maintain that diet without all those things that are so common in our everyday lives?
Well, I always say people don't change if they have NEP syndrome. NEP syndrome stands for not enough pain. So if your skin's itchy and red and inflamed all the time and your joints are hurting you and you feel like crap, you're more likely to adhere to whatever you're doing that's
Mm.
making you feel better,
Mhm.
right? So I think when people understand the link between what they do to themselves and their symptoms and their well-being, they make a choice. And not everybody's going to make the choice. Like my stepfather had a cardiac surgery. He had bypass surgery. He was, close to diabetic. He had a terrible infection on his sternal wound. So he was in the ICU with his chest flayed open for over a month on a ventilator. He came out of the hospital, and rather than saying, gee, I'm going to get my act together and I'm going to eat better and I'm going to exercise and I'm going to never have this happen again, he went back to his old ways and literally ate himself to death. So some people won't change, but some people will.
Dr. Mark Hyman, I'd like to get your sense of the difference between lifespan and health span and help us better understand chronological versus biological age.
Yes. Well, I think that everybody can understand this. You see people who are like 50 years old who look 80, and there are people who are 80 who look 50. And I think that's something that people notice. The question is why? And the reason why is something called biological aging versus chronological aging. I can't change my chronological age. I was born in 1959. I'm going to be 65 this year. There's nothing I can do about that. However, there is something I can do about my biological age. And for the first time in history, we now have a methodology to actually assess your biological age. And that is something called DNA methylation. Essentially, it looks at your epigenome, which is the control system for which genes are turned on and off. Epi means above. So it's a system that sits above your genes that regulates the expression of your genes. And that determines the rate of aging. And so when you change your lifestyle and your habits and your diet and your exercise and you take certain supplements and maybe get enough sleep and learn how to deal with stress and do other interventions, you can change that biological age. So I did my biological age through this technology when I was 62, and my biological age was 43. That was 2 years ago. And I learned a lot when I was researching my book, Young Forever. And I was able to use that on myself over the last 2 years. And I just rechecked at 64 what my biological age was. And even though I got 2 years chronologically older, I got 4 years biologically younger. So now I'm biologically 39, even though I went forward 2 years chronologically.
Whoa, 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 whoa. That's almost unbelievable.
I can share you the results from the credible lab.
All right,
it's pretty impressive.
We're going to take your word. We're going to take your word for the results. But what did you do differently?
Well, I engaged in a program of regular strength training. I increased my protein intake to build muscle. I decreased stress in my life. I also implemented a lot of therapies that are out of reach for many people, but I decided to try to experiment them on myself with things like stem cells, with plasmapheresis, with exosomes, with peptides, with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, with other things that I've used, something called the PK protocol, which essentially is a way of detoxifying your cells. And I've been doing all these practices over the last 2 years, and turned out it worked. I didn't know if it would work, but
Well, you know what's so astonishing to me, Dr. Hyman, is that here you are practicing what you preach, especially when it comes to your diet. I mean, you have written phenomenal cookbooks. I mean, they're always so appealing. You look at them and you go, yes, I want to eat that for dinner tonight.
And that Forever Young cookbook, Young Forever cookbook, I should say.
That was Bob Dylan's
It's
Forever Young.
It is beautiful. It is beautiful.
And so it's like, wait a minute, how could you improve on what was already phenomenal?
I'm always learning. The science is always changing. I think I for a long time I was a vegetarian. Then I tended to not have enough protein, and I was losing muscle. And I think muscle is where your mitochondria are, and so I basically have learned how to improve the health and function of my mitochondria, which are central to healthy aging. And so that was something that I really focused on, and it turned out it works.
One of the topics that you address in Young Forever, the discussion of all of the science about how to extend longevity and extend our health span, is the blue zones. Can you explain to us? I think probably a lot of people have heard about blue zones, but they may not know exactly what they are. And I'm sure there are a few who have never heard. What the heck is a blue zone,
Well,
and why is it important?
Yeah, well, it came out of the work of a friend of mine who's a brilliant journalist, Dan Buettner, who went around the world finding areas in the world where people were studying longevity. And there was a scientist at the time who used a map to kind of outline where in the world people had very long lives. And he used a blue pen to circle these spots on the map. And that's why they're called blue zones. There's nothing special about it. And there are other quote blue zones that haven't been identified in the same way, but it's Sardinia, Icaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy. It's the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, Loma Linda, California, and Okinawa in Japan. And so those are the areas where people seem to live to be very, very old. And so he went and researched what are these areas and what are the things they have in common. And he established that there were a number of principles. And when I was researching my book, Young Forever, I actually went and spent time in Nicoya and in Icaria and in Sardinia. And I got to meet the people and talk to them and understand what was going on. And essentially, the first thing I would say is they have a really kind of low stress life. One of the guys I met, his name was Silvio. It was a shepherd. He had a few hundred sheep and goat on the top of this mountain his family had had for hundreds of years. I said, Sylvia, do you have any stress? And he's like, well, looked at me very strangely, quizzically. with this funny expression on his face. I said, stress, like when things are hard or difficult or challenging, like he's like, oh, yeah, yeah. He says, sometimes in the middle of the night, when a goat gets loose, I have to go get it. So that's
Okay.
his picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
They ate food that was close to nature. They didn't call it organic, but it was. They ate food that they grew themselves. They ate food that wasn't hybridized and uh, in order to create better shelf stability and more starch, and which depletes nutrients and protein and phytochemicals in the food. They had a very phytochemically rich diet. They ate a diet that was high in omega-3 fats. So it was really nutrient dense. They moved naturally. I met one guy, Pietro, was 95 years old. I think he just retired from being a shepherd the year before. He was bolt upright, clear blue eyes, booming voice, straight spine. And he told me, he was every day would basically climb the mountains 5 miles every single day with his sheep to graze his sheep. And that was just what he did. It wasn't because he was exercising. He was just doing life. And there was one other guy, Carmine, who I met, who's family had this farm on the side of this hill, and it was pretty steep, and the whole, there was olive trees and fig trees, and he had a garden, and he had animals and sheep, and it was really interesting. And I kind of toured it with him, and then at the end, he kind of wanted to go up this hill, and he had this trail, and I tried to follow him, and I could barely keep up with him, and I'm in pretty good shape. I was riding my bike 2.5 hours a day. I'm, at 3,000 feet of vertical climbing on my bike. I mean, I was really fit, and this guy was just smoking me, and he's 86 years old. So I think it's pretty exciting to see how, with just a few simple principles of building community and connection, of a regular movement, of real whole food, really was sort of simple principles that we can all follow to help us live longer, better lives.
I actually want to go back to the idea of stress for a minute and what you're talking about when you say, reduce the amount of stress in your life to the extent you can is chronic stress. But you also really emphasize in Young Forever the benefits of certain types of acute stress, like taking a sauna or jumping into a cold swimming pool. Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah. It's great. So there's, these bad stress and good stress. There's this concept in medicine called hormesis. Essentially, it means a stress that doesn't kill you that makes you stronger. So exercise is a form of hormesis, right? If you're lifting weights, you're tearing your muscle fibers. You're creating some kind of trauma that stimulates your body to respond in a way that builds more muscle, that creates more mitochondria, that responds to the injury. And so we know, for example, that the only thing that's been repeatedly shown to extend life in animal models is to calorie restrict, basically to give a third less calories. The animals live a third longer. So for a human, that would be the equivalent of living to 120. Now, nobody wants to eat a third less calories because you're going to be hungry and miserable and not very happy. But the point is, the body has this capacity of kicking into gear these repair, regenerative, renewal, and preservation systems that are built in when we stress our bodies. And we live in this perfectly climate controlled bubble in the 21st century where we never have to stress. We don't have to get up for our couch to change the channel. We get food delivered to our house. We don't have to go and even shopping anymore. There's Instacart delivered to your door. We are not exposed to extremes of temperature, cold. And so we've kind of gotten soft. And turns out that hormesis, through practices like fasting, for example, an overnight 12 to 16 hour fast, is a sort of stress that kicks your body into repair. Exercise, hot and cold treatments like saunas. 20 minutes in a sauna at 170 degrees Fahrenheit is a very powerful way to activate healing response in your body. Cold plunges, maybe 50 degrees for 1 or 2 minutes a day, profound beneficial effects. We have hyperbaric oxygen, which is a stress where you're put in a pressure chamber and go down to basically what would you 66 feet under the sea with 100% oxygen. There's hypoxia treatments. In Vilcabamba in Ecuador, they have a lot of longevity, and maybe because of the altitude, we don't know, but we know there's something called inducible hypoxia factor, which activates healing responses in the body that turn off inflammation, that make you have new cells and mitochondria, and that reduce oxidative stress and activate DNA repair. All these wonderful benefits simply from engaging in some of these practices that may seem a little bit hostile to the body, but are actually good.
Dr. Hyman, you talked about the blue zones and these places far away and up on mountains and walking 5 miles a day with the goats, but you also said another place, Loma Linda, California. That's not so exotic. What are they doing that's prolonging their life in Loma Linda?
Well, yeah. Well, they were Seventh-day Adventists, and so they had a really deep sense of connection and community and belonging and meaning and purpose, and meaning and purpose in actually scientifically. This is published not in a kind of in a tabloid, but this is in the Journal of the American Medical Association, is established to extend life by 5 to 7 years, which is staggering. And when you look at other things like curing heart disease and cancer from the face of the planet, both of those, if you did those together, would extend life by 5 to 7 years. So having meaning and purpose is incredibly important. And being part of a religious community and being connected and having shared values, being supported throughout life's journey, really critically important. They were also very focused on eliminating bad behaviors. So no smoking, no drinking. They also ate a healthy diet. It was a vegetarian diet. So they did have animal foods, but it was more dairy and eggs, and they tend to eat more phytochemicals and vegetables, which is clearly shown to be beneficial. So all of that is, I think, sort of explains part of why Loma Linda is one of the blue zones.
You're listening to Dr. Mark Hyman, founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. He's also founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine and founder and chairman of the Food Fix campaign. Dr. Hyman's latest books are Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life, and The Young Forever Cookbook, more than 100 delicious recipes for living your longest, healthiest life.
It's time for a short break. When we come back, we'll explore how best to eat for good health.
We're always enthusiastic about breakfast. What does Dr. Hyman offer as a favorite?
One that he likes is a special sweet potato and egg stack.
He also shares his favorite smoothie recipe.
What is the longevity switch? And how can you activate it with your food choices?
We talked about the right kinds of stress being good for our bodies. That's also true of the plants we eat.
What are 3 ways to increase our longevity starting right now?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Today, we're talking about how you can live a long and healthy life. Many people assume that aging will ultimately lead to disability and chronic disease. Our guest today says that's not inevitable.
Health experts often talk about the importance of a good breakfast, but what exactly does that mean? Many people skip breakfast entirely. Others rely on a cup of coffee and a Danish to start the day. Why does Dr. Hyman place so much importance on breaking our fast in the morning?
We're talking with Dr. Mark Hyman, family physician and internationally recognized expert in functional medicine. He's the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center and founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. Dr. Hyman has written numerous books, including Young Forever and the Young Forever Cookbook.
Dr. Hyman, your Young Forever Cookbook, as I have mentioned, is beautiful. The recipes are amazing. Do you have any personal favorites?
But first, I want to start with breakfast.
Okay.
And
Joe has a thing about breakfast, which is good. I like this
I do, because it's the way you get your day off to a good start. So you have some really cool pictures and some delicious breakfast recipes, and they go way beyond pancakes and way beyond eggs and sausage or bacon. So give us 3 of your favorite breakfasts that are both beautiful and delicious.
Well, thank you. I think people think they have to suffer to eat healthy. And I just think that is is just a false choice. And I think it's actually, it serves the food industry very well because they can say, well, it's okay to have bad stuff in moderation as long as your overall diet is healthy. Well, I don't think you have to make that choice. So one of my favorite recipes is Himalayan tartary buckwheat pancakes with berries. And Himalayan tartary buckwheat is an incredible food. It's a grain, an ancient grain from the Himalayas that has the highest concentration of phytochemicals of any known food. They're highly immunomodulatory and immunorejuvenating, including things like quercetin, lutein, and many other phytochemicals that some of them are never found anywhere else in nature. We use pasture raised eggs in that recipe. We use almond flour. We use almond milk and berries and a little bit of quarter cup of orange juice to sweeten the berries in a compote. A tablespoon or so of maple syrup in the entire recipe. So it's just a higher protein, phytochemically rich, high fiber, delicious way to start your day. I love that.
And the picture is gorgeous, but where would I find Himalayan tartary buckwheat?
Buckwheat. Well, good thing it is a regenerative farm that was started. It's a long story. I won't have time to tell it on the show, but we can come back for that. There's a regenerative farm that was started by a Cornell professor, an ag professor in upstate New York that grows regeneratively Himalayan tartary buckwheat and turns it into flour. And you can buy it from Big Bold Health, which is a company that's commercialized the use of that product. And it's actually from my mentor, Jeffrey Beland. So that's great. Another one of my favorite recipes I love is a combination of eggs and kimchi and avocados. Now, kimchi is a fermented food, so you're getting a lot of good probiotics. Eggs are incredibly healthy because they contain all the nutrients for a new life. Avocados are full of good fats and monounsaturated fats. And so it's basically a really delicious kind of bowl of kimchi, egg, and avocado bowl. It's sort of an unlikely combo for people, but it's really a very delicious, simple breakfast. And one of my favorite things also is to do frittatas. Those are easy. I actually find I have a recipe in here, but you don't actually need a recipe because basically I go in the fridge and look at whatever's kind of going bad. And I basically chop up all the veggies, onions, garlic, a little olive oil, stir fry them, beat some eggs up, throw the eggs on, a little salt and pepper, and stick it in the oven and bake it for a little bit. And you've got this beautiful, fluffy kind of frittata that's super easy to make from all the stuff that would probably end up in the garbage. Otherwise you can eat. But the roasted red pepper and zucchini frittata in the book is also quite delicious.
Well, the one I really like is the one, and I've never had it before, sweet potato and egg stack. And it involves an avocado, egg, and a fancy sauce.
That's right. Cashew hollandaise sauce, which is delicious because you get the protein from the cashews and you get yummy stuff. You get pickled red onions in there. Again, pickles or pickled foods have probiotics in them. So you're getting, the whole idea here is that food is medicine and that, you don't really have to suffer if you want to eat well. And that there's a lot of phytochemicals in foods that can be included as part of a natural recipe that has enormous health benefits and actually activates what I call these longevity switches. The body has these embedded longevity pathways that are responsive to the food we eat. And so we can activate those through the right diet.
What is a longevity switch?
Oh, you got a couple hours? Longevity switches are
not quite.
Essentially these four main ways that our body senses nutrients. When we eat, we have nutrient sensing systems, and they sense protein and fats and carbohydrates, and they sense scarcity, or they detect too much food or abundance. And the four pathways are these longevity switches. They are modulated by food and also by some of these hormetic practices, by phytochemicals, by stress or exercise, and even by certain medication. And they include mTOR, they include insulin signaling pathways, something called AMPK, which maybe people know about because metformin has been talked about for longevity, and sirtuins, which were really first studied by David Sinclair and Leonard Gorte at MIT, and about resveratrol. But basically, these are pathways that are these embedded regenerative repair renewal systems that exist within us that we just have to learn how to turn on. And it's like like the Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She always had the power to go home. She had ruby red slippers on. She just didn't know she could just click them 3 times and go back to Kansas. Well, we have that in us. We just have to learn that we need to click our heels metaphorically and turn on our longevity switches by how we eat. And I explain that in great detail in the book. And so I think it's really an important concept for people to understand.
Now, Americans are in a hurry, and especially for breakfast, because they oversleep and then they have to run out the door and then they have to worry about traffic. And so what they want is something quick, like a smoothie. And you've got a bunch of smoothies. So tell us your favorite smoothie, please.
Well, it's what I have every day. I call it my healthy aging shake, and it's in the recipes in the book, and it's essentially uses regeneratively raised goat whey. Goat is less inflammatory than cow from a dairy source. Whey protein is extremely usable by the body to help build muscle. It has A2 casein, which is not as inflammatory as traditional dairy. So I use about 40 grams of goat whey protein as the base. I throw in actually Himalayan tartary buckwheat sprout powder. So it's essentially sprouted buckwheat that's turned into a powder that's full of these phytochemicals. I put in something called urolithin A, which is from pomegranate, to upregulate my mitochondria, which has been very deeply studied. I use creatine, which helps to build muscle. I also add in some probiotics, some mushroom adaptogenic things like lion's mane and reishi mushroom and cordyceps into the shake. And I throw in some frozen berries and some macadamia milk. And voila, I've got this amazing way to start the day that makes me feel good and energetic and feel full and helps me build muscle. And it's a great way to start the day.
Now, Americans also love snacks. We snack our way through life. And most of the time, it's chips and, high fat, high salt, not very good for you, food, but we crave those flavors. You have some really cool snacks in your book. Like, for example, ginger and cashew energy balls instead of like granola bars that are full of sugar or other sweeteners. Tell us about ginger and cashew energy balls and tomato and sardine crisps.
Okay. Well, these are the ginger and cashew energy balls are like ginger snap cookies, except they're way more nutritious. The cashews have a great source of healthy fat and protein. It can help, improve your cholesterol. The blackstrap molasses gives you a lot of iron, which is important. Ginger is incredibly inflammatory. Cinnamon has properties that help regulate blood sugar. Almond butter provides extra protein. And so it's just a yummy, delicious thing. Dates are in there also, just to get a little bit of sweetness. And it's just a great thing to have as a snack. The other one is more of a savory, a savory kind of snack. And I think people may or may not like that, but I love sardines. In fact, they're I think one of my favorite foods because they're such a good source of omega-3 fats. They're a great source of protein, of choline, which is important for the brain, vitamin D, which is hard to get from food, calcium if you eat the bones. They're also low in mercury, so they're a great source of fish. And essentially what I do is you take tomato, avocado, onion, and you sort of chop them up. And then you put in olive oil, lemon juice, a little bit of salt. Then you add in the sardines. You sort of gently break them up with a fork, and you put in some dill. You season and taste with some black pepper, and then you put them on the crackers, and they're delicious. And you can store it in the fridge, in an airtight container.
Oh, it sounds delicious. Now, you mentioned mercury, and that's something we need to be careful about. You have also written in Young Forever about detoxification, and it's one of the most important 7 systems that we all have to keep functioning properly.
Correct.
Tell us about detoxification, because at one time people would talk about detox and what they really meant was laxatives. And that doesn't seem like really relevant.
No. I mean, people, think of drug detox and rehab centers, and that's not what we're talking about here. Your body has a system to deal with waste. It's your skin, your lungs, which you exhale carbon dioxide waste, your liver, which metabolizes both internal metabolic toxins and environmental toxins, your kidneys, your stool. So you have a whole system, and it has to work properly. Imagine if you don't pee. What happens if your kidneys fail? You die in a week. What happens if your liver stops working? You die pretty quickly in a week. It's not like a subtle thing that you need to have these systems working to properly operate. And so one of the fundamental principles is understanding how these systems work and how you can improve their function. One, by reducing your overall environmental exposures. And I'm on the board of the Environmental Working Group, a nonprofit that has wonderful guides at ewg.org to help you identify how to reduce toxins in your food through reducing pesticide exposure in your animal products or picking the right ones, in your household cleaning products, in your personal care products, skin products, and many, many ways that we're exposed to, an inordinate amount of environmental toxins. And then you reduce your exposure, but you also have to increase your ability to excrete them. So you need to have plenty of water. So we should be drinking lots of clean water. We need to make sure we're eating tons of fiber. So we poop every day. We need to sweat through exercise or saunas. These are just activating our own system of detoxification. We also may want to take certain nutrients that help upregulate these pathways, because these are all metabolic pathways that require nutrients to function. And this is how your physiology works. Every chemical reaction requires a helper, and those helpers are vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals. So, for example, zinc helps get rid of heavy metals. Selenium increases detoxification also of metals. You have the B vitamins like folate, B6, a key process for regulating the excretion of toxins. You have also the phytochemicals, for example, in broccoli and that whole family of collard, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Those have glucosinolates, which are powerfully important inducers of glutathione production in the body, which is the main detoxifier. So there's a lot of ways through diet and a lifestyle and certain supplements and phytochemicals that you can improve your body's own waste disposal system.
Now, Dr. Mark Hyman, you've talked a little bit about why we need certain kinds of stress, and you talked about certain ways that we can do that, like a sauna, that where your temperature goes up, or then, getting into a cold bath and hyperbaric oxygen, and the variety of strategies where there's quote unquote good stress. And I'd like to talk about stressed foods for just a second, because you go to the supermarket and you can get all kinds of exotic vegetables that are grown in a hothouse. Why are you so big on stressed foods? What are they, and why are they good for you?
Well, we talk about phytochemicals, but nobody really understands the context of what these things are, right? We say eat broccoli because it's good for you, or have tomatoes because they have lycopene, or have garlic because it has allicin and all these properties that are beneficial to us. But the question is, why are they there? I mean, they're not there for our benefit, right? The plant kingdom didn't create these compounds to help us live a long life. They're there because they're the plant's defense system. They're the plant's protection. They're their immune system. And so they're designed in some ways to deter them from being eaten, to kind of deter predators. And so these phytochemicals, when we consume them, they do create a little bit of a stress on the system, but in a good way. For example, when you have, let's say resveratrol from grapes, it activates sirtuins, and sirtuins are one of the longevity switches I talked about that are part of the hallmarks of aging, and they activate them in a way that activates your body's DNA repair, because it's like, oh, danger, I better do something to activate my body's own healing system. I better turn off inflammation. I better cause more antioxidant production in my system. I better improve the health and function and number of my mitochondria. And so basically the body, when it gets exposed to these phytochemicals, actually activates its own healing system. And my belief is that we co-evolved with these compounds and we borrowed them because our bodies are very lazy. For example, we don't make vitamin C. We have to get it from our food. Guinea pigs are the same, but most other animals make vitamin C. And so we just don't bother making these because we got them from food. And so like omega-3 fats or vitamin D, for example, from the sun. So we didn't really need to make them. And yet I do think these nutrients are really essential for us if we want to live a long life.
Dr. Mark Hyman, 3 ways to increase our longevity starting right now.
Really simple. First thing is cut out starch and sugar as much as you can from your diet. Think of it as a recreational drug. 2, start strength training and have a gram of protein per pound of body weight a day to increase muscle mass. And 3, make sure that you find a connected, close community that will support you and become your core source of connection and meaning and purpose.
Dr. Mark Hyman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure. You guys are fabulous, and I miss you.
You've been listening to Dr. Mark Hyman, a practicing family physician and an internationally recognized leader in the field of functional medicine. He's the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and founder and chairman of the Food Fix campaign, dedicated to transforming our food and agriculture systems through policy. Dr. Hyman is the host of the popular health podcast, The Dr. Hyman Show, and author of Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life, and the Young Forever Cookbook, more than 100 delicious recipes for living your longest, healthiest life.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
Today's show is number 1427. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. That's where you can share your comments about today's interview. You can also reach us through email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. We'd love to learn about your favorite breakfast. Do you have a smoothie recipe you recommend?
And Terry, one of the things that I really love are sardines and his recipe for sardines and crackers.
It's great.
Oh, it sounds fabulous. Our interviews are available through your favorite podcast provider. You'll find the podcast on our website on Monday morning.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you could sign up for our free online newsletter. That way, you get the latest news about important health stories. When you subscribe, you also get regular access to information about our weekly podcast. So you can find out ahead of time what topics we'll be covering. Speaking of the podcast, we'd be very grateful if you'd consider writing a review of the People's Pharmacy and posting it to the podcast platform you prefer.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.